Hello, everyone. It is that Weems guy here for another episode, and we are recording this Wednesday, November the 2nd, promptly at 8 p.m. And a guest tonight making his triumphant return to the That Weems Guy show is Tom Givens. How are you doing, sir?
I'm great. How are you tonight?
I am doing all right. Now, before we get into the planned show, I got to put a little pressure on you and see if you're up to the challenge.
All right.
By the time this show drops, we'll be at like 49,200 total downloads of the show. Are you going to be the episode that pushes us over 50,000?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Or is it going to be the guy next week?
No, it'll be me. Right. Even if I have to log in several times.
Well, John Daub is actually approaching 2,000 on his episode alone. You're in second place to John on total downloads on that. So I think John may have come up with some bots. You know, he's a tech guy.
Mm-hmm.
So he may have come up with something.
You know, it's not who votes that counts. It's who counts the votes that matters.
That's right. That's right. If you would just give a quick intro, I'm sure most people that listening to the show know who you are.
Okay. Full-time trainer. Started teaching part-time in 1975, full-time since 1996. Did a little law enforcement work way back in the day in the 70s and 80s. Teach pretty much all over the country, although I'm getting old, so I'm starting to cut back my long-term travel a good bit starting next year, and starting to wind that down over the next 3 years. Do some expert witness work on firearms training, various courts around the country. Written 6 published textbooks, 4 chapters in other people's textbooks, about 150 magazine articles. I could go on, but I've been at this a very long time. As you said, I think everybody that watches the show probably would be bored for me to go through it all again. So that's we can leave it at that.
All right. So you've been at this for more than a minute. What you're saying?
Yeah, a couple of years. I'll have 50 years in this training. I'm thinking seriously about making a career out of it.
Yeah. Well, if you stick around a little bit longer, you might figure out what you're doing.
Yeah, it's possible.
There you go.
Well, or I could ask some of the young guys. They're always willing to tell me.
Yeah. I amused myself here recently by posting a picture of Jack Weaver.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if he were around today to post his own picture on the internet, how people would tell him he was wrong about the Weaver stance.
Yeah. He not only does it wrong, he's wrong about how it developed.
Yeah. Which is funny because his comment in a late in life interview was he learned all sorts of stuff about himself by reading magazine articles.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Several episodes ago, we had a group of guys on, and we were talking about when is it okay for a private entity to begin certifying instructors. And I want to clarify something to the audience before you and I get started on this discussion. Rob Garrett was intentionally playing the foil in that episode. He was trying to be sort of
not that dumb in real life.
He was trying to be the devil's advocate and put the questions out. And he really had a good faith motive with his questions and the way he was asking them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if the audience necessarily understood Rob's career. At one time, he was the training guy for one of the largest law enforcement agencies in Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
He was also, at one point in time, their internal affairs guy. And just to round out the triumvirate of unpopular positions within an agency, he was over accreditation.
Mm-hmm.
So if it was fun, somebody else got it. Rob got all the stuff that makes people mad. And so, he sees everything through that prism.
Yeah,
everything.
Rob was there when Moses went through the academy.
Yeah. And, Wyatt Earp was his FTO, I think.
Uh-huh.
But, I do want to point out to the audience, because there was a little bit of negative feedback that directed toward Rob. And Rob had a good faith effort, motive behind the questions he was asking. And I think it's a legitimate question. Mm-hmm. And it's something that we as the industry need to be looking at. So let me throw the question to you, as I know you have your own certification program. When is it acceptable for a private entity to begin certifying instructors?
Well, let's kind of go back a little bit. I think when we were talking with Rob, or you were talking with Rob about that, more or less saying the NRA is the certifying entity, organization, whatever you want to call it, for law enforcement firearms instructors in this country. And that kind of begs the question, well, how did that come about? They started their law enforcement activities division, LEAD, and also play on words there for lead, in 1960. Well, you have to remember in 1960, there was nothing. It was a void. Gunsight didn't come along until 1975, 15 years later, as the first non-governmental fixed facility school, actually. So in 1960, there was nothing, absolute void. So the NRA said, we've come up with a program. We are the experts, and got some state post committees and police agencies to accept that, and just kind of de facto became the certifying power, because there was nobody else. There was nothing. And so they kind of self-appointed themselves. So how's that any different from what people are doing today? If you take my program, for instance, we set it up in 1997. I've got Tennessee to recognize it first, because that's where school was at the time. I was trying to get my own staff certified. And as they accepted it, and since then we've had South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, probably a couple other places, accept our training for law enforcement in-service training credit. And Oklahoma, South Carolina, Arkansas, Tennessee, Florida, all recognize our training in lieu of the NRA certification to get a state license to sign off on people for carry permit training, but call different things in different states. But wherever you have to get mandatory training for a permit, there's some state licensing involved, and there's a half dozen states, and Texas is pending. We're just waiting on some of the DPS people to get back off the border, back to the academy. They're all out in the field right now. So essentially, we did the same thing the NRA did. We got some police agencies and some states to recognize our program. So the NRA is just not the only fish in the pond anymore. So when the question is, well, how can I, meaning me personally, how can I certify other people as instructors? Well, it's the same way the NRA did. I develop a curriculum, get it okayed by various government entities, and there you are. The NRA is just not the only fish in the pond anymore, because the pond has both evolved and grown a good bit since 1960. In 1960, police firearms training consisted primarily of single action revolver firing a double action revolver, thumb cocking at single action mode on bullseye targets. And there was not a single private sector academy in the country at the time. So when the NRA set that up, they were starting with a blank slate, and that doesn't make them in perpetuity the only authority. It just means that they stepped up and created something where they saw a need for it. So we've done basically the same thing, and several other organizations done the same thing after us. So that when the question is, well, how can you set yourself up to certify other people from to lack of a better term, a legal standpoint? I've got a dozen states, both state and federal courts around the country, that have accepted me as an expert witness. So that means court certified as an expert in his field, plus published author, plus all the training I've been through over the decades, and got these various states to sign off on it. So it's the exact same process the NRA went through. So when somebody says, how can I do that? Well, that's how I did the same thing they did, basically.
Well, to be fair to Rob, I think his question was some sort of certifying body overseeing it, not necessarily the NRA.
Mm-hmm.
Because
that's really the only one there is.
Right. Yeah. Thinking back of the history of the NRA, if memory serves, it was actually founded by Union officers that saw how deplorable the Yankee boys shot compared to how the Southern boys shot. And they established the NRA as a training ground to train marksmanship to private American citizens. Right. And then it was ultimately, wasn't it a battle over their range that they set up in New York that prompted them to get into the political arena?
I don't know. I couldn't really comment on that. But you're right about the origins. The idea was to have a organization nationwide that could raise the skill level of the public at large in case there was another large scale conflict where we needed a lot of men at arms suddenly. That the experience in the Civil War was that a lot of people came in with no knowledge whatsoever of firearms, and they didn't have enough time to actually teach me anything. And so the idea was to go back to the citizen soldiers of the Revolutionary period, where you had people who already had their own weapons and some skill with them when they're called up as a militia. When you call up a militia that don't own guns and don't have any skill with them, it's rather pointless. So the idea was to bring up the level of ability of the population at large. The whole NRA competition side of it grew out of the fact that the only way you get people interested in that sort of activity is to offer them some kind of little prize. So, people, as people will fight harder over a little plastic cup than they will to try to save their life. So they started rifle competition in the 1870s and then pistol competition in the late 1880s, and just as a way of getting people to participate in the program, because it's a private organization doesn't have any authority to compel people to do any of these things, no matter how good for them they might be. So the idea of competition was to lure people into the program. And that's exactly what they did in 1960 when they started the law enforcement side of the house. That's also when they started police pistol competition the same year. And again, to try to give people some incentive to actually train. So when they first started certifying police officers, instructors, there was no national standard for that. And there was frankly very little firearms training going on in the country. And they saw the writing on the wall as we entered the 60s. Violent crime started going up, and the number of officers being killed in the field went up, peaking about 1970. So they saw that there was going to be a need for an active training program. And there was nobody else to certify anybody, so they stepped in and did it.
All right. If I recall, two of the troopers that were involved in the Newhall incident were the best shots, in quotes, of their academy class.
Yeah, I don't remember that, but it wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. But, their training consisted as what you described earlier, standing there shooting bullseye, thumb cocking, a revolver in a single action.
Their qualification course at that time was still the national match bullseye course, 300-point bullseye match.
Right. And, the Newhall incident is sort of what woke up law enforcement. And, as I'm often quoted as saying on the show, there's 18,000 law enforcement agencies in the United States, so you can't speak of them as a single entity. But, that era is when law enforcement, the Imperial, we began looking at training and saying, all right, we got to start teaching how to actually use the gun versus shooting it. But, it was the private sector with Cooper and Gunsight that really led the way on that. And then the West Coast agencies were started going to Gunsight, getting that training, and then going back to their agencies. And if we hadn't had private sector driving that, development may have been delayed by decades.
Yeah. The progress usually starts in the private sector and then slowly bleeds over into the public sector. Whether you're talking about a police department or the NRA, you're talking about multiple layers of management that have to sign off on anything. The NRA law enforcement side of the house does a fairly good job, but they can't change anything for years because it has to go through multiple committees and be signed off up and down the line, and just like in a government bureaucracy. Whereas the private sector can be a lot more flexible, a lot more responsive. When equipment changes, we can, with a stroke of a pen, I can change the lesson plan. I don't have to get it okayed by somebody. And we can evolve as equipment evolves, as the threats evolve, as different new knowledge becomes available to us, we can evolve. Whereas in the public sector, it takes decades to change things, as you know.
Yeah.
So stuff starts in the private sector. And speed loaders have existed for a very long time. The British had a fairly modern speed loader in the 1870s for their Webleys, but they were pretty much unknown in this country until the NRA started police pistol competition. And in the course of fire, a lot of your shooting time was eaten up loading loose rounds out of pocket. And then they got slanted belt loops, which made it a little bit better, a little bit faster. But people discovered speed loaders and say, if I can spend less time reloading, I can spend more time shooting X's. So when all the national champions in PPC are using speed loaders, and that starts bleeding over out into the field. But it didn't start in the field and work its way over in competition. It started competition, works its way into the field. Autos started dominating practical pistol competition as early as the 1960s, but it took to the mid-1980s to finally get them accepted in law enforcement. But it was after 2.5 decades of success in the private sector. And so that's just an example of an advantage private sector schools have over the institutional schools, is we can just be more reflexive, more responsive, and more attuned to what's going on in the real world.
Yeah. You know, I had the bully pulpit of my agency for 12 years. But even with that bully pulpit, I was still hampered by state mandated things as far as training goes. Well, in my private business, I like you just said, I can just change it with the stroke of a pen. I can decide, well, from now on, I'm teaching this and just do it. And I even gave myself an out. I renamed all my courses last year, and I left the description of Pistol Craft 2 blank, so it can always be my way, whatever I want it to be.
Yeah, nice to have that flexibility, which you don't have in the public sector or the NRA.
Right. And the other part of that is with the government sector, the state has established a standard, and Justin Dial addressed this a couple of episodes ago. All right, the state has established a standard. Well, people tend to gravitate, well, that's the measure of good. And, you know, I can't speak for every state, but I can speak for Georgia. And our standard, even 100 on it's really not that good.
Yeah, same way here. I can literally pass hours with my eyes closed.
Yeah, I have passed the Georgia one doing everything as support hand only draws from a strong hand holster, including the reloads and beating the times. And passed. I didn't max it, but I passed it.
At one point a few years ago, Higginbottom was trying to get the Kentucky state governing body to upgrade a bit, and he demonstrated a perfect score on their qualification with the cap and ball revolver. Just show how ridiculous it was. Shot it clean with probably a Colt native.
Yeah. Of course, I don't believe I want to take on Jim Higginbotham if all he had was the cap and ball.
Yeah, wouldn't be a good idea.
Yeah, I expect he could do some pretty good work with old Colt Navy.
Yeah, remind me to tell you a story about that. We're not on the
air. Now that's going to prompt all kind of emails and messages and texts. What was the story? So let's speak into the development of Rangemaster's instructor development course.
Okay. Well, I try not to sound overly critical, but we opened the mothership in Memphis in 1996. And Tennessee at the time had just passed a carry permit statute statewide. Before that, carry permits were governed by county sheriffs. The county sheriffs issued them. They set requirements. They set whatever training requirement. In almost every case, you went to the county sheriff's department to get, they called it training, about 4 hours of classroom stuff, and then you qualified with a pistol on a very, very, very easy course. But that varied a great deal from county to county. Some counties were shall issue. Some counties were, if you were a donor to the sheriff's campaigns, you might get one. And other counties were, no, we're not going to have civilians carrying guns. So in 96, the state decided to take it out of the sheriff's hands and put it under the Tennessee Department of Safety and make it a statewide program and have the training done by private entities. Well, I had been considering setting up a school, a fixed facility school. And when I found out that was going to take effect in 96 as well, that's what perfect timing. So we opened our school in 96 specifically to hit that market. So over the next 18 years, we trained 45,000 people through that permit process there in Memphis. And so what that meant, unfortunately, was that we taught class either 6 days a week or 7 days a week, every single week of the year to meet that demand. We had 5 pistol courses, the first of which was the permit class, which is 8 hours in length, about half and half range in the classroom. And then the next level built on the skills you learn in that one, you start working from the holster and reloading under time and whatnot. And then the next class added to that, and then the next class added to that. So we had 5 altogether. So if you took all 5 of them, that's 40 hours, about 2,000 rounds, and people were actually pretty confident. And most people took one class, wait a couple months, take the next level, wait a couple months, take this. So over the period of 6 months to a year, people would typically go through all 5 levels and get a pretty fair degree of skill. But we way above the norm nationally. We had about 45% of students who went through the permanent class went through the whole process. They either got the permanent class, you never saw them again, or they took the permanent class and then took all the steps after that and became pretty confident. But again, that meant that we were teaching 6 days a week, sometimes 7 days a week. And for the first year, that was me teaching 6 days a week or 7 days a week, every week. I said, I got to have some help. And so I started interviewing people for positions as instructors there at school, and brought in people from all the local law enforcement agencies. That didn't work. Brought in people from the local federal agencies. That didn't work. So what I found was, with all of these various law enforcement firearms instructors that came in to apply, first problem was they knew how to work whatever their agency's issued gun was, but didn't know how to work anything else, or absolutely and totally unfamiliar with anything other than their issued gun. And frankly, weren't terribly interested in learning how to work anything else. None of them, and I mean none of them, had any formal training beyond the NRA LE course and whatever their own agencies training division did. Nothing, none of it had ever been outside to outside school, private sector school. So consequently, they didn't know anything. They didn't know anything about teaching. And I had a devil of a time with this. I had people who were actually firearms instructors for their agencies who I couldn't hire. They were just completely and totally incompetent. And so then I started interviewing private sector people who were already teaching in the area but didn't have their own range. And none of them had anything but the basic NRA civilian side certification. Didn't know how to do anything. So I finally just came to the conclusion if I was going to have any help, I was going to have to train it myself. And I reached a point where I was going to have some help. So I wrote the original program, sent it to the Tennessee Department of Safety, and they took a look at it and said, well, this is far more in-depth, far more stringent, far more demanding than the NRA course. So yeah, we'll sign off on you guys. So for many years, we were the only entity other than the NRA that could certify instructors in Tennessee for Tennessee license as a handgun carry permit instructor. So that's how the program began. So for the first 15 years, we just did one instructor class a year. And that was basically where I drew my staff from. And we wound up with, when we closed the place in 2014, we had, I think, 53 certified instructors on the staff, about 8 of which were lead instructors, could actually teach a class without me or anybody around. And then the rest were what we call assistant instructors. And typically, we would have a lead instructor and 2 assistant instructors would run a class of up to 20 students. And that allowed me to continue to have classes 6, 7 days a week, week after week after week, without just completely burning me out. I taught a little over 1,000 classes in the first few years before I got the staff built up to the point where I could turn it over to other people and actually go home once in a while. And so once I got that staff up and running, then I started doing more and more classes on the road. I started out doing 8 or 9 a year on the road originally. And then when we closed the place in 2014, I started all of my training being mobile, and 30, 35 a year since then. So basically I started the program because I had to. Only with competent help training myself.
Yeah, I remember I was in that last instructor class that was taught at the facility. And one of the guys, I think it was Andy Anderson, was in that class. He's like, come here, look on the door and the sign you put up that the facility was closing. I'm like, we just got here. What are they doing closing this thing down? And of course, then that freed you up to go on the road.
Mm-hmm.
roughly how many graduates of their initial 3-day certification course are there?
There's about 1,600 scattered throughout the U.S. now, about 60 in Europe, and half a dozen in Latin America.
Okay.
We just hit about the 1,600 mark here in the U.S.
All right. And I think, one of the hallmarks of your program, not that you want to brag about a failure rate, but there is a failure rate.
There is a failure rate. That's almost unique.
Yeah.
Over the long run, we have about a 12.5% washout rate. And it's one person in 8. Mm-hmm. The way I look at it, if everybody is passing, then your standards don't really mean much. If nobody's passing, then your standards must be unrealistic.
Yeah.
But if 7 out of 8 people pass, and that 1 in 8 doesn't make the cut, that seems to me like we're probably treading, pretty close to the line. It's hard to say. And I don't want to say, like you said a minute ago, I don't want to set a 20% failure rate. I'd like everybody takes part in the program to graduate from it, but that's an unrealistic expectation. People are people, and not everybody's going to perform to whatever standard you set for them. We set, as you know, high standards, and we require adherence to them, because standards that you don't enforce are meaningless, totally meaningless. So for the integrity of the program, it's a 90% pass score required on 2 different qualification courses and written test. And every now and then somebody will score an 89 on one of them. They'll come to me after class all mad because they didn't get a certificate. So, I shot an 89. I almost passed. You should give me the certificate. My response is, well, I almost gave you a certificate.
Yeah.
But 89 is not 90. If you give them one at 89, then the guy at 88 wants one, then the guy at 87 wants one. So 90 is 90. You either make it or you don't. So that's where the failure rate comes from. And I'll say this: almost everybody, and the exceptions will be extremely rare. Almost everybody that falls into one or two pretty narrow little categories. The first category is they come in thinking that it's going to be easy, with no background, no real skill, no real prior training. The people who come in with only an NRA basic pistol instructor certification, or only a USCCA basic pistol instructor certification, where there's no real, I'd say no standard, but it's not real high. They've never been really held. Their feet haven't been held to the fire, really. And they have never shot competitively. They don't really have any skill. It baffles me that people like that show up. I've never dived. Well, it would never occur to me to go in a dive shop and say, hey, I'd like to be a dive instructor. That just wouldn't occur to me. Somebody that's never jumped out of a plane, wouldn't walk into a parachute shop and say, hey, I'd like to be a parachute instructor. Right? But those are both activities in which, if you screw up, somebody can die. Well, so is ours. We kind of remind ourselves of that every now and then. We're not playing. If you get bad advice from your golf coach, the worst that'll happen is you suck at golf. You get bad advice from your tennis coach, the worst that happens is you suck at tennis. You get bad advice in this business, people can die or go to prison. And Claude would call that a negative outcome.
Yeah.
And I view that as pretty darn suboptimal. So, and you also got to remember, you're going to be dealing with strangers with real guns and live ammo. That is not an environment for learning on the job.
Right.
That's not a good idea. So that's the first group that don't make it. They come in with just no skill, no real background, no footing. And then the other group come in thinking they already know everything. Mm-hmm. And they don't touch the manual, and then they fail a written test because they think they know it all, and they find out when they take the written test, oh crap, there's a lot of stuff I didn't know. And we warn them on the first morning. So we're giving you an almost 300-page manual for a reason. The answer to every question on the test is in the manual. You really need to forego partying for 2 nights and study the manual. And if you don't, on the third day, you're going to fail. So then when they go party, I had two ladies take the class one time. And while the other relay was shooting their qualification courses, they had about an hour and a half to study, which I left their relay in the classroom to study. And I could see the classroom from the firing line. And they spent the entire hour and a half standing outside talking to each other instead of being in the study group with the rest of their squad in the classroom. And then they both failed a written test, and they both wrote me like 2-page single-space nastygrams about having failed. That's what, of course you failed. You didn't make any effort to pass. It's not up to me whether somebody passes or not. It's up to them. If they don't put it to work, I'm not going to lose sleep over it. So that's where that 12.5% comes from. If you show up with some skill with a handgun, so we can teach you how to teach rather than have to teach you how to shoot, and you pay attention to what we do in class, then everybody that does it passes. But if you show up saying, well, this is the way I've always done it, and we tell you, well, you're not shooting up standard, you'll have to change that. No, this is the way I've always done it. And then, there's not much we can do for people like that.
I can't recall how many of the IDCs I've assisted with, but I concur with that those are the two groups that fail.
As I said, almost without exception.
All right. The initial certification course is 3 days.
Yeah.
And there's a next level that comes after that. They call that advanced instructor. And so basically, if the initial course if we were doing it over 5 days, it would be Monday through Wednesday, and advanced is Thursday and Friday.
Yeah, we just pick up where we left off at the end of the first one. I wish I could get people for long enough at one time, but the reality is that only occurs in the institutions where you have a captive audience.
Yeah.
So if you've got a 16-week academy and 4 weeks of that's going to be firearms training, then you've got them for however long you want them. They can do whatever you want to do with them, and they're a captive audience. But that's people who are on the company clock being paid to be there, and they're doing their job when they're on the range. Most of our students, as you know, 80% roughly, they're out of their own pocket. They're on their own dime, their own time. So it's really hard for them to get a day or two of travel on both sides and 5 days of training. We're talking about, a week and a half away from work, away from family, away from all the other obligations that all of us have nowadays. So it's really hard to do. So, you've been to the institutional schools. You know as well as I do that they will take those 5 days and pack 3 days worth of information into those 5 days, but spend a great deal of time just fiddle fucking around, twiddling their thumbs, wasting time, and that just drives me nuts. I hate that. So we do the exact opposite. We pack as much as we can into those 3 days. As you know, there's not any downtime. There's no waiting for something to happen. We take a brief break and go right back and hit the next topic, whatever it may be, whether it's in the classroom or on the range. So we literally take 5 days and cram them into those 3. But if I could get people for 5 in a row, the advanced class would be days 4 and 5 of it. So what we typically do, most people, I don't know the percentage, but I can easily say most people take the first class and then sometime between 6 months to a year later take the second class. So we have to spend a little bit of time on the first day in the advanced class kind of getting everybody back up to speed. So it's really a little bit different than if I had you for 5 in a row, because we wouldn't have to do that. You would just go straight out to day 3 and day 4. It's a little bit of kind of getting people back up to speed, you might say, in that class. But it is, as you said, essentially it would be days 4 and 5 if we had you for a 5-day class. Covers the things we love to be able to do in a 3-day class, but we just can't do in 3 days. Right. There's a limit. There are 24 hours in the day, but if you think people can handle a gun sufficiently and learn for 24 hours, you're on the wrong planet. And an 8-hour day where you're actually having to concentrate mentally and perform physically is more than a lot of people can do today. Just an 8-hour day, really, because most people, especially in the private side of the life now, they work sitting down in an air-conditioned cubicle, and when you get them out on the range, standing up for hours at a time and having to repeatedly present and holster the weapon and do other things with it, and the percussion of gunfire around them, and the mental concentration, learning new skills. At the end of the 8-hour day, they're toast. Yeah. So there's a real finite limit. A real red line limit to what we can do in 3 days. So we do as much as we can with that 3 days and still have a profitable learning experience for them and a safe environment to work in. So that's why we cut it up the way we do.
All right. And then the follow on to that is a 3-day master instructor class.
That is if I had you for, ideally, I would like to have people for 2 5-day weeks, but that ain't going to happen in the private sector. That's just not possible. People would have to take off a couple of days on both ends. There'd be a weekend in between for rest and study. So you're really talking about almost 3 weeks. That is simply not going to happen in the private sector. Yeah. So if it were possible, then you get all 8 of these days in one scratch plus a little more. So the master class is just an acceptance, if you will, of that limitation that we just simply have to work around. The first 2 cover the stuff that you just, by God, got to know. And then the master class, we get into stuff that you should know as an instructor. The first half of the first day of the master class is a lecture on the evolution of firearms training. Well, what we think of as modern firearms training didn't start till about 1920. So from 1920 to 2020 is a 100-year span that actually covers the evolution of what we think of as modern firearms training. And I think instructors, someone who's being paid to teach other people this stuff, should have some idea of the history and development of the discipline. It's not enough to say, do this because this is what the book says, do this because I'm the mommy. You should be able to explain, well, we used to do this, but we found out this works better than that. And if we had this, we could actually accomplish that. And if you don't know that historical background, I don't think you're fully developed as an instructor. And it's amazing to me how many even full-time, quote, professional, unquote, instructors just have absolutely no idea where we came from or how we got here. Hell, I've been here for half of it. So I've seen half of it firsthand, but I've had an opportunity to study the other half of it pretty well. You probably can't see it. Let me see if I can turn my computer.
Yeah, okay.
See that wall over there? You're seeing a third of that wall over there. That wall is all bookshelves. There are, last time I counted, 350 books over there that deal with what we're here about in some manner. Peripheral, they're either historic books from some of the old gunfighters, or they're early gunfighting texts from the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, right up through modern stuff today. There's in one section right there, there's at least 12 or 15 different instructors from that period that I've talked about from 1920 to 2020. And that's a wealth of information there. But it baffles me that a lot of the instructors that I talk to not only don't have those books, I don't know who the names are. When I say someone, who? Has he got an Instagram channel? No. Got a YouTube channel? No. No, he's been dead for 80 years. What could you possibly know? Well, he killed 100 men. Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. What would Charles Askins know about gunfighting?
Really?
Don't take social advice from him.
If you want to be a psycho serial killer with a bad, then you can emulate it. But the fact is, he knew an awful lot about fighting.
Yeah.
And he's just one. He's just one example. I mean, there were tons of them in the 1920s and 30s. It was a different world sociopolitically, and it was one of those peaks in violent crime that violent crime in this country goes up and down like a wavelength diagram. And it was at a peak. You take Prohibition, the first narcotics laws, the Great Depression, the Dust Bowl, and then sudden influx of automobiles into American culture. So Americans became mobile suddenly. Our culture lost its local roots. In 1920, the typical American lived his entire life and died within a 3-mile radius of the house he was born in. And that's no longer true after the automobile became common. So when you add all of those 5 things together, we had an enormous amount of violent crime. And in the 20s or 30s, if you took a shot at a cop, we didn't have riots when he got shot. It was, well, should have expected that. Yeah. And so there were a lot of professional gunmen in the 20s and 30s that wrote books about their experiences, but that kind of predates YouTube and Instagram and Facebook. So no, that information is not there, but it's there in books if you just get off your ass and go find it.
That brings up a point too, that I wrote an article and it's on my That Weems Guy webpage. I get these today in history things that I love to read, what happened on this day and whatever. And one day I'm reading one of them and it describes some gangster, or I forget what the gangster's name was because he's not important, who was killed after his bank robbery was foiled by a barber with a double-barreled shotgun that was part of a trained vigilante group. Well, that's what caught my attention. And so I started looking at what's this trained vigilante group? And I ended up finding an academic-based article on an organization in Indiana in the 30s that was basically an association of banks. Mm-hmm. And they set up a training network with competitions to encourage, marksmanship training, basically set up a surveillance and response team for bank robberies. And they added like a call roster and say the first national bank of whatever little town got robbed. Somebody would get on the call roster and start calling, all right, they just got robbed. People would go to their assigned intersections and set up roadblocks. And the banks were buying revolvers and pistols and Tommy guns and giving them to this private citizen. They would basically have this whole response net. One of these groups even bought a aircraft with machine guns on it. They took it so seriously. And that was the response to a bank robbery during the Depression era in Indiana. And eventually it faded out when radio networks became a thing.
Yeah, one of the first photo slides in the historic presentation in the master class is from a bank robbery training drill in the 1930s, where they have a plywood teller station set up with the counter and the teller's window and the whole bit, and the bank manager and the teller are both holding revolvers, holding off these masked bandits with revolvers. Those are government issued model 1917 Smiths left over after World War I. The government gave out. Postal carriers in rural areas carried them. That was the first issue gun for the Border Patrol. The government just handed them out left and right. And they handed out quite a few of them to banks. This before the FDIC. The idea was, you better hang on to that money because it's not insured.
Yeah.
The whole idea of let them have the money only came about much later after the FDIC was formed.
Yep. To those that are listening to this and they're trying to decide whether they want to go down the Rangemaster certification road, I love that lecture so much that I tell people that the reason to take the IDC and the advanced courses so you can go to the historical.
Yeah, it's just amazing to me how many people sit on none of that. There's about 40 individuals and 8 or 10 really watershed incidents that we go over in that lecture, and 9 out of 10 people that come through it have never heard of 38 of the 40 people or 6 out of 8 of the incidents. It's just amazing to me.
Yeah.
Of course, part of it, nobody reads anymore. It's not a 30-second soundbite. Nobody's going to see it.
One of my favorites from that day, and I know the negative impact that he had on training, but was Delph A. Jelly Bryce getting hired by the Oklahoma City Police Department at a pistol match.
Because he whipped him.
Yeah, because he beat him. Son, you're hired, report to duty. And he shows up in Oklahoma City, and as he arrives in town, he kills several armed robbers.
Yeah, he kills 2 the first night on the job.
Yeah, puts them in his car and shows up at work the next day. What do I do with these 2 bodies? What do you mean, these 2 bodies? Well, I killed 2 robbers last night.
Boy, it was a different world in 1920.
Yeah, that wouldn't fly these days. And then
that might cause consternation today.
Yeah, it might.
Imagine the letter to the chief deputy.
Yeah. I couldn't imagine that happening now. And then, of course, he basically became a one-man SWAT team for the FBI later.
Pretty much the Oklahoma City Division's one-man SWAT team, and that he was one of a dozen or so Southwestern lawmen with a reputation as real CAI gunfighters that who were brought in form the flying squad, kind of the first federal SWAT team, you might say.
It's one of those things where because this guy had a natural talent and could do things that were actually superhuman,
Mm-hmm.
the assumption became, well, the exact way that he does it is how everybody should be doing it. Well, if you didn't have his superhuman vision,
Yeah.
you couldn't pull off. And if you didn't spend hours a day practicing his techniques like he had done his entire life,
Yeah, that's the
it
thing.
just didn't work.
I knew Bill Jordan a little bit, and Jordan would literally go home and make 1,000 wax bullet 38 special loads and shoot them that evening, and next evening go home and load another 1,000 and shoot them. Next evening go home and load another 1,000 and shoot them. And that's how he developed some of his exhibition shooting skills. But that doesn't mean the skills that he shot in his exhibitions were what we teach people who carry a gun for a living, because they're not going to go home and tell the wife and kids, I'm sorry, I can't be with you tonight. I got to go do my 1,000 rounds every night of the week. They're just not going to do that. So that's a mistake to think just because somebody with Bryce's vision or Jordan's obsession, it makes that a viable training technique.
Yeah. And of course, he was also faced with the very real possibility that he was going to have to use those skills for real every day on the job. And I think the story's in his book where he got in trouble for being involved in a shooting. And when he admitted that they sent somebody back to the office to get more ammunition.
Yeah.
So,
that was kind of what caused the consternation. If you could go back and bring more ammo, you could have just left.
Yeah. That book is No Second Place Winner, if I remember the title correctly.
Yeah.
All right. You just recently taught a new iteration of the instructor courses.
Yeah.
That's the pistolcraft instructor.
Yeah. Back 15 years ago, we used to do a 5-day long class once a year. It was not an instructor program, though. It was before we started that. But it was an opportunity for people to get what you might call an immersion level experience for 5 full days, including at least one night working after dark, low light techniques. But we only did it once a year, and we quit doing that for the longest. But I started that new course this year because, as I said, it's really hard for people to get 5 days in a row for instructor training, but some people can pull it off. And if they can pull it off, that's a really good way to do it. You've got an opportunity to keep your mind engaged in learning those skills for multiple days in a row, and actually let's start singing and build up enough reps to actually start singing and doing it correctly. And we can cover more stuff. The one we just did, of course, we had the low light segment where we stayed and shot right at dusk without flashlights, and then after dark with flashlights, which we just simply don't have time to do that in a 3-day course. So with the 5 days, it eliminated that need to drop back and bring people back up to speed that we have in the advanced class, and allowed us to have a night fire session. And so we're started that back up with this year, but it's as an instructor program, not just as a user program. And it worked really well. We had some really highly skilled people by the end of the week, both academically and physical skill wise, and it worked really well. So we've got one on the books for next year as well, and that's for those rare people who actually do either have the ability or the commitment to take 5 days plus travel on both ends and do the program that way. If I could get away with it, all the instructor classes would be 5 days. I just can't get away with it.
And so people that attend that class, they're eligible to go directly to master.
Yeah. That class covers what we would in the 3-day class and the advanced class, plus some additional stuff that we're able to do because we don't have that little catch-up time. I have Tiffany and Akil came in and did some really important stuff on marketing for instructors, which is something most instructor programs don't get into, and how to train and maximize the use of assistant instructors so that they're actually adding value instead of just being on the range. I see a lot of, for 6 or 7 years, I was on the masthead of SWAT magazine. My column every month was to go to a different school and watch them and write them up. And that's a dream job for a trainer. Got to go to 30 or 40 schools and audit how they do things. And work it into our programs. But one of the things I didn't see in any of them was any training on how to properly utilize an AI. And a lot of them had AIs, but in many cases, they were as much in the way as they were helpful. So I thought that was really a useful block of instruction for them on how to develop AIs and actually utilize them in class. And in the marketing information, which is, again, something most programs just don't cover. And then I had John Hearn come in and do one of his blocks on the mental side of this, which, as you know, he spent the last 10, 15 years researching and developing a program on that. So he has a 4-hour lecture that is, I think, critically important for these newer instructors. So we were able to work those into the 5-day program as well. So it was really successful. I wish more people could or would do it that way, but right now it looks like I'm going to limit that to one a year because there just don't seem to be that many people who can do 5 days plus the travel.
Yeah. And then there's,
if you don't work for yourself, that's, understandable.
Yeah. Now there is debuting next December a level beyond that and master, correct?
Yeah. I didn't realize it until I got the file out, looked at it the other day, but we've now had about 165 people graduate from the master instructor course, which is about 10% of the total instructor population. And every now and then I get a question from them, well, what's the next step? I said, well, there isn't one. You've gone all the way. But then I thought about it. I said, well, actually, that's not true. There's still a lot of it. I mean, the fact that I've told you everything you know doesn't mean I've told you everything I know. And so I thought about it a bit. I said, well, hell, there is still stuff we haven't had a chance to cover. There's skills I could push them harder on. There are drills I hadn't been exposed to. But in the classroom, there's stuff we just simply haven't had time to cover. So I came up with another 3 days. I posted the question, and we have a Facebook group for our instructor graduates. And I posted the question, who would actually be interested in that? And within a couple of hours, I had 30 or 40 responses. So I said, well, I guess the demand's there. So I finished up the lesson plan and posted the class. And within less than 12 hours, it was sold out 14 months in advance. So I said, well, I guess there actually is a demand. So I put 2 of them scheduled for next year, not next year, for 24. Because the first one is next year, 23, and then 2 in 24. And frankly, that may be it. It takes a while to build up more master instructor graduates because we only do 1 or 2 of those a year. And so we'd be looking at 2025, and hell, I might either be dead or retired by then. So we'll play that by ear. So right now there's 1 in 23 and 2 in 24, and that's the only ones on the books. In fact, about half my 2024 schedule is already done.
Oh, there's one other instructor course, and that's the defensive shotgun instructor course. And for the audience, I'm going to relay a tale of Rangemaster lore that not many people are aware of. Tom and I were sitting in the lobby of a La Quinta hotel in Franklin, Tennessee. And I looked across the table and said, Tom, I've got a way for you to make money. And Tom leaned back in his chair and said, most of the time when people say something like that, I don't believe them. Said, well, you've got all of these people that have gone through your handgun instructor courses. Wonder if they would take a shotgun instructor course, because there's really not a lot of that out there on the private sector side. And so we put it together and we tried it one time as a trial balloon, and it took off and is doing well.
It has. We do 1 or 2 of those a year. That's another area where there's a god awful lot of misunderstanding, misinformation, bad technique, bad information. So I think you're going to see a little renaissance of shotgun that we're already seeing, actually. It's coming back around. Yeah, as you know, this entire business is a 15-year cycle. Every 15 years, we go through the same crap again. We rediscover all this crap again. Same arguments again. Optical sights on handguns. Yeah, when I shot my first pistol with an optical sight on it?
Probably nice.
1968.
Okay.
1968. Now that's what, 54 years ago.
I know there's a picture of one in the J. Henry Fitzgerald book.
Yeah, from 1930.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's none of this crap's new. It just goes around and around and around. So anyway, the shotgun's making a comeback now, but there are only, I'd say, 6 or 7 people in the country who actually teach defensive shotgun. And and I say defensive shotgun for a reason. The sporting application of the gun is absolutely nothing, not even related to the social application of the gun. So there's plenty of people out there teaching tramp and skeet, sporting clays and that sort of thing, but that has absolutely nothing to do with the social use of the gun. So there's very few people who actually teach that, and we've done what, 4 or 5 of them over the last few years. I got a couple of them coming up over the next year, but the main thing we do in that one is dispel all the bullshit people come to class with, and get them straightened out. It's more an exercise in disambiguation than anything else.
I want out the guy here on the show, but I remember standing on a range in Wisconsin looking at a guy saying, one of the most venerable firearms instructors in the world sent you a written document with instructions on which buckshot to bring, and you brought something else. And you're shocked at what you're seeing on the target.
Yeah, I send out a multi-page memo with color photos to get them prepped for that class. Yeah. And they show up with stuff that, that doesn't look like anything like that picture. And they say, well, it doesn't look anything like what I got listed here. Yeah. And they wonder why they don't do as well.
Yeah.
Here's a clue. If I send you a memo that says do this or that for class, do this or that.
Right.
It'll work out.
Yeah. Yeah. The document was written and provided for a reason.
Yeah. I don't enjoy typing.
Yeah.
When I was in high school in the 60s, men didn't take typing. Real men didn't take typing. Yeah. And if you had tried to convince me that I typed for a living 50 years later, I'd say you're out of your damn mind. So I don't enjoy typing, and it's hard on my hands. So if I type a 2-page memo, it's because reasons.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a conversation with a Rangemaster certified instructor today, and one of the questions he asked me says, "So what is that reunion thing all about?"
Okay. Well, if you're, and you know this because you're a career law enforcement officer, if you're the police, you got to take certified in-service training every year to keep your commission. If you're a doctor, you got to take continuing education credits every year to keep your medical license. If you're a lawyer, you got to take continuing education credits every year to keep your law license. Professions require continuing education. So if you want to call yourself a professional firearms instructor, then you're saying you're a member of a profession. And if you're a member of a profession, then you have to have ongoing education. So the whole idea of the instructor conference, so once a year, it's an opportunity to get in-service training for our certified instructors. We have people literally come from all over the country. We had guys, this year's was just a few weeks ago, and we had people from as far away as Montana, Idaho, California, New York State, everywhere in between. But the idea is to come get together for both classroom and range training to further their education. But it's also just a really good networking opportunity. If you live in New York State, you got a cousin in Nevada that needs some training, then you know who to contact, and not a shot in the dark like it is in most places. But primarily, as I said, it's aside from the social aspect of it, it's really intended to be in-service training for our state. When you go through, say, our 3-day class, and I give you your certificate at the end of that, you are, by definition of handing you the certificate, you are certified. But that's not the end of the game. That's just, you have reached a milestone. Like I said, I've been seriously training since the early 70s, and I try really hard to take 1 or 2 classes from somebody outside the organization every year. And people ask me, "What, you've been doing this longer than that guy's been alive. Why are you taking a class from him?" It's because he may know something I don't know, or he may say something in a way I haven't heard before. The way I look at it, Ken Hackathorn said this years ago, he said, if I go to his class and I pick up one little nugget, then it was worth my time and money. And that's the way I look at it. I don't expect to learn anything earth-shattering if I go take somebody else's class. but I do expect to pick up a nugget or two. You know, when I took Ernie Langdon's pistol class a couple of years ago, and Ernie pointed out something I wasn't aware of in my own technique, because you never know what you're doing. You know, qualified coach could look at you and see things you don't know you're doing. And I took Gabe White's class a couple of years ago, picked up something out of that I immediately worked into our program. I have never, ever been to a class where I learned something. Now, it may have been, for God's sake, don't do it that way, but that is learning. And so if somebody's been doing it as long as I have, still seeks continual training, then I think somebody who's been at it 4 or 5 years probably needs it too. And so it's really an opportunity for that. We all, you know, if you want to shoot a lot less, be a full-time trainer. So we all need an opportunity to get some structured trigger time. And as I said, trigger time where somebody's watching you. That's the problem. And when you practice on your own, a couple of falls, real pitfalls there. First, Ty Green said it's easy to be the best guy on the range if you're the only one there. So there's really no way to push you. And then the other thing is, as I said, if you're committing an error, you'd never know it. I mean, how many times have you told somebody that taking their fingers off the gun between the shots? No, I don't do that. Hey, you're coming all the way off the trigger with your trigger finger. No, I don't do that. Or whatever it may be. And after you argued with them 3 or 4 times, we typically step back and video them and then show them, yeah, you are in fact doing that. Now shut the fuck up, we're doing it. But they don't ever know they're doing it. Well, we don't either. So if you errors creep into your technique over time where nobody's watching you. So I like to go take somebody else's class just so they tell me if I've developed some little bad habit like that, and I can get it back out before it becomes too deeply ingrained. So I think it's really critically important. And like I said, you know, we learn things. We've learned more in the last 10 years about how your brain works, how you learn physical skills, how you retain them, and how you can apply them under stress. We've learned more about that in the last 15 years than we did in the 5,000 years before that. So if you hadn't been to training in the last 15 years, how the hell would you know that? How would you pick that up? If you think about the primary guns that people show up for class today, Glocks, M&Ps, H&Ks, none of them existed prior to the mid-'80s. And the Glock's the oldest. The bunch came to this country in '86. The rest far after that. So if you hadn't been to a class since the early '80s, how the hell would you know anything about running other platforms? So I think it's really critically important. So that the main idea of that annual event is continuing education / in-service training / networking, so we can get together with people like mine where not everybody thinks you're crazy, you know, because of what we do. And I think it's important from that perspective. We'll be doing it again next August at Ed Monk's really nice facility in Arkansas. You know, really nice civic center we use for classroom, and range is really nice modern range about 10 minutes away from it. That's where we'll be next year.
All right. Well, the members of the That Weems Guy Show Facebook group have submitted some questions. They're going to ask some of them of you now. One coming from Carson Baldry is, what is the biggest mistake that you see from inspiring instructors, and what gaps do you see in the training industry as a whole?
He wants all this information for free, doesn't he?
He's a good guy. He's trained with me.
I think one mistake I see a lot of newbies make is try to teach beyond their own knowledge base. It takes a while to have experience in different gun platforms, different techniques and whatnot. And I think I see a lot of people like for instance, I've run into a lot of people over the last 10 years who will take like our 3-day instructor class and then immediately start teaching the same stuff. You just learned that a month ago. How the hell could you be teaching that to somebody else? So, you know, the phrase "stay in your lane" kind of comes to mind. What I think people are prepared for after that initial class is what we think of now as gateway instructors. People are taking these brand new. So, you know, we got an awful lot of gun buyers nowadays that grew up in an urban environment, never seen it. I mean, hell, you get people in police academy now that have never seen a gun in person before they get there. And so the gateway or entry level instructors is very important. But a lot of people for lack of a better term, for ego reasons, don't want to be thought of as an entry level or gateway instructor. They want to teach what I teach. Well, hell, I've been doing this for 50 years. Maybe you ought to be in this 2 or 3 years before we start doing that. You don't really have the breadth of experience that it takes to teach the beyond the basic type techniques. And the other part of the question, I think there's an enormous need for gateway instructors, which a lot of people, as I said, they don't want to be thought of that way as I guess, it's kind of like nobody wants to take a basic class. If you call it essentials, you might sell it. If you call it fundamentals, you might sell it. If you call it basic, well, hell, I don't need a basic class.
Yeah.
I'm way beyond that. Well, no, you're not. And the same way with gateway instructors, they don't want to be thought of as entry-level instructors, but that's where the biggest demand is. And it's also, and this is one of the paradoxes in this business, it's also the most important for at least 90% the people that take that gateway or entry-level class. That's all training you're ever going to get. Most programs have about a 7 or 8% return rate. We had a unique environment in Memphis where you had the most violent metropolitan area in the country, and the fixed facility training center right in the middle of it, where people could come in the evening and train from 6 to 10 on the weekend. And so we had kind of the perfect storm for training that high number of people and being able to retain 40-something% of them. But in your typical training environment, people who take a permit or first level class, that's it. You never see them again. So that is by far the most important training you're ever going to get, because it's the only training you're ever going to get. So if you screw that up, you could have some real problems down the pike. But if you do that right, not only do you prepare them to go home and not be a bigger threat to their family than the bad guys, but you've also possibly sparked that little flame in them to seek some further training from somebody who is qualified to teach beyond that level. So from both of those perspectives, I think recently we started calling them gateway instructors. Tiffany and Keel have a gateway instructor program now to try to prepare people for that specific task, because we think it's so important. As I said, it's the only training the majority of students are ever going to get. The people who take a couple of days off on both sides in a 3-day class or a 5-day class, whichever, are such a tiny percentage of the gun owning public. We're talking about several places to the right of the decimal point. Depending on who you believe, there's somewhere between 100 million to 150 million gun owners in this country. You got maybe 10,000 that actually actively train out of 150 million. That's not even, a statistician would tell you that is not a fly speck. It's not, it's inconsequential. So I think people kind of lose track of the notion, lose sight that the gateway instructor job's the most important job in the whole training community. I laugh when people call it training industry. I laugh. It's a training community, and it's a damn small community. But the gateway guys are actually the most important component of that. If they've been trained correctly, properly, then they can properly train that vast mass of people who aren't going to get any other training but what they give them. So to me, that's the most important link in the whole chain.
Pretty certain that Carson was actually in the inaugural Gateway Instructor Program that Tiffany and killed just this past week. And to demonstrate that I have been paying attention to our recent conversations in the book that arrived in the mail yesterday, the importance of gateway instructors because of the whole notion of primacy.
Absolutely. It's so much easier if they do decide to get some further training down the pike to build on a proper foundation than it is to try to undo crappy training and then replace that with proper training. It's so, I would, any day of the week, I would rather work with people who have had no training than people who have had bad prior training. And 9 out of 10 that have had training have had what?
Bad
training.
Stop jerking the trigger. Brian Horton, who was another very dedicated student, and of course I'm saying is dedicated because he comes to take classes with me.
Right, right.
Which that's the definition.
He's very tip of the spear there.
That's right. But I know he's trained with some other great folks as well. He asked, what flawed ideas and mistakes have you seen hold back good shooters who are trying to become great shooters?
Probably the biggest thing is it's kind of a Zen thing. It's self-limitation. You can do a lot of things with a gun you don't think you can do if somebody shows you how to do it correctly, and then you push yourself a little bit. Part of the problem is so much of the industry has low expectations. And and you see this, if your state mandated qualification course is a friggin' sobriety test, as most are, and your guy shoots 100% on it, he is not going to work any harder than that, because what did he just do? Perfection. 100% score means what? To your average person, it means perfection.
Yeah.
So why on earth would I work harder when I just shot a perfect score? Okay. So I think part of the problem that holds people back is a fairly low standard, and then meeting that standard and saying, okay, that's good enough. Good enough is not good enough, basically. People tell me fairly frequently, your typical marksmanship problem in the real world is it's a fairly large target, fairly close. It's not a daunting marksmanship problem. And that's true. The difficulty is that is then have to be executed under a great deal of stress, where you're going to lose a good bit of your skill. So if you are barely meeting that standard in a training environment, you're not going to meet that standard in a fight. Whereas if you're exceeding that standard greatly in a training environment and you drop 25% of your skill, you're still ahead of the curve. So I'm a big proponent of pushing all the time. Every time I go to the range, I try to get, but I don't try to meet a standard. I try to exceed it. And when I post the drill of the month every month, the par time or par score for it is not what I can do. It's what I think somebody that's reasonably competent ought to be able to do. And my personal goal is, whenever I shoot it, first, when I come up on these drills, I go to the range and shoot it, is to be at least 50% ahead of whatever I think par ought to be. And if I can't do that, then I work till I can. And I think that's a real easy trap to fall into, is say, okay, now I'm good enough. No, you're not. Nobody is. I've debriefed a lot of people after gunfights. I've never had one come back to me and say, when the BB started coming back this way, I wish I hadn't trained so hard.
Yeah.
I've never heard that. You can't be too good. You can be really good and probably will be okay, but I'd rather be even better and be able to say in my brain, we can handle this. If you can look at that developing situation and say to yourself, I think we can handle this. You probably can. It's when you look at that, oh shit, this guy's going to kill me. Set yourself up for a real problem there. And we're not talking about false bravado. We're talking about real skill that your subconscious knows you have or don't have. You can't fool your subconscious. Your subconscious knows, did you put in the time? Did you burn the ammo? Did you put in the sweat? Did you actually take time out from things that you enjoy doing to build some of the skill? Or did you not? You can't fool that little guy in your head. And if he looks at what you have done and says, okay, we can do this, really, really likely that you can. Okay. Yeah. Training and practice builds skill. Skill builds confidence. Confidence prevents panic. And that's what allows you to use your skills in a real fight. So I think the key is to get better and better and better, so your brain can look at that guy in the parking lot and say, not say, that guy's going to kill me, but say, if that guy doesn't smart up, I might have to hurt him. And that's a whole different outlook. And that comes from real skill, not, like I said, not fooling yourself. Real skill, not 100% score on a sobriety test, but some real skill. I think that's a common thing I see, is people reach a point and say, okay, now I'm good enough. No, you're not.
All right, I'm going to combine two questions. And so this combined question is sponsored by the EDC Belt Company and Brian Eastridge, and I'm wearing my EDC hat here and Brian has actually asked one part of this question. We've been beating this constant drum of the pistol mounted optics questions in here. Well, Brian wanted to ask what your opinion of pistol mounted optics is. But then another person in the group, Ryan St. Jean, asked about the use of white lights for private citizens, not cops, not security guards, or whatever. We had kind of a discussion going today in the show group on Facebook about those two topics. I'm just going to throw them all into one.
All right. Well, let's start with optics. Mm-hmm. First off, let me be crystal clear about this. I am not anti-optic. Okay. You want an optic on your gun, put an optic on your gun. I don't care. Yeah. Do I have one? No. I have played with them enough that I know how to teach it. I played with enough to satisfy myself whether I want one or not. After over 50 years, been teaching people almost 50 years, but I've been shooting over 50 years of trying to convince my little pea brain to look at the front sight. I am not now going to try to reprogram it to do something else when I'm 70 freaking years old. Because I'm just now getting where I actually remember to look at the little bucket every time. So I'm not going to change that. Do I see advantages to the optic? Yes. For instance, as I just said, I'm 70. So my vision is not what it was when I was 28. So I shot the bullseye course 2 days ago. And I shot 285 out of 300, which is a 95% score. But almost every single point I dropped was at 25 yards. Okay. Damn near clean to 25. Would a dot improve that? Probably shoot 295 if I had a dot. But it wouldn't improve the rest of the course. Okay. That's 6 rounds out of 50 at 25, which is 12% of the shots. In the real world, 12% of your shots don't occur at 25. 2% of your shots do. Okay. So I'm not willing to go through the heartache of trying to transition at this point in my life to something that only improves the least likely scenario. The other thing is, and I get crucified every time I say this, but I'm going to say it again anyway. The last time I saw a set of iron sights fail in a class was about 3 years ago in Texas. A guy who did not Loctite his Glock front sight nut came off, front sight came off during an iteration. And we found it. One of the guys in class actually had some Loctite. We Loctited it back in place and everything's lovely. But had they been in a fight for the duration of that fight, he would not have had a front sight. But that was 3 years ago. I'd never, and I mean that, I never have a class where optic doesn't fail, ever. There was a guy in the class we just finished up, the 5-day class we just finished up, who has an adequate amount of money, has a properly professionally set up pistol with properly mounted red dot on it, and one of his mounting screws sheared the head off, and so the gun immediately lost 0. During class, he had to switch to another gun. He's been around. He brings multiple guns to class. At the end of that course fire, he just put that one away, got another one out, finished up the class with another gun. But that was a failure of his sights in the middle of an iteration, just like the one where the front sight came off. I had a class in Texas back in the spring, would have been May probably, where we had 11 people in class with optics, and 4 of them failed in the course of a 3-day class. That's a lot. Yeah. One of them, guy drew the gun. It had been working fine. Drew the gun. There's no red dot. It's turned on. Its battery's fresh. There's just no dot. Not just the LEDs quit working. Another one, every time the guy put it in the holster, it turned the thing off. So every time he drew it, it'd turn it back on. Another one came physically off the gun. It was probably improperly mounted. You know, the dot disciples will start screaming, "That's an operator error." Yeah, I'm sure it was. And then another one came loose and lost 0. And well, actually the fifth one, battery went dead and had to be replaced, which you can't do in a fight. But I see that every class, multiple failures, not the occasional failure, but multiple failures in every stinking class. I honestly don't think I've had a class in the last year, and they've all had optics in them. About half to 60 or 70% of people in class nowadays are showing up with dots. I've never had a class where at least one optic didn't fail in the course of the class. And like I said, it's been 3 years since I saw a set of irons fail. I've personally never had a set of irons fail because I like the crap out of mine and do other things to them. So that's the issue to me. The issue of on an open emitter site, the issue of liquid, whether it's rain or water from some other source, or it's blood or whatever it may be, winds up with multiple dots. Closed emitter kind of solves that, but a closed emitter is too damn big for a concealed gun the way I wear one, personally. So I consider that to be a problem. I mentioned that instead. The dot disciple immediately jumped up on me and said, "No, I carry my gun concealed. It's not going to get rained on." No, it's not until you pull it out, dumbass. I've had my gun out in the rain for real, and it got rained on. In fact, I had back in the revolver days, I had a gun out in the rain, in such hard rain that when I got off shift and went home, I had to detail strip it and dry the inside of it out, put it back together. So yeah, I've had a gun out in the rain, and had that had a red dot on it, it would have been absolutely friggin' useless. Oh, having to take it off to change the batteries, any design that requires that, it's just friggin' stupid, because now you got to re-zero it every time you replace the battery. Oh, so for me personally, no, I'm not going to have a dot. Do I care if you have a dot? No, I do not. Can I teach you how to use it? Yes, I can. So I'm absolutely agnostic on that. If you want one, that's fine. To me, I'm not going to tell you what brand of gun to carry. I'm not going to tell you what brand of ammunition to carry. It's your ass. You make your choices based on the information I give you and other people give you. Make an informed choice and live with it. And I'm the same way about dots. You want a dot on your gun, put a friggin' dot on your gun. But if you don't want a dot on your gun, you're not going to get killed in the streets. We had, trying to think, I don't keep track of this, I should. In the class we just finished up, we had iron guys and dot guys right at the top of the class, just neck and neck. I think the top 5 or 6 guys at the end of the class, their aggregate scores were all within 1.5%. You know, this guy's 2/10% ahead of the next guy, who's 0.2% ahead of the next guy. So I think the difference between the 5th place guy in class and the 1st place guy in class was maybe 1.5 out of 300 points. And that was a mixture of dots and irons. So can you still do good work with irons? Yeah. Does a dot have certain advantages? Yeah. Does a dot have certain disadvantages? Yeah. So you want one, fine, get one. You don't want one, you're going to die. Well, you are going to die eventually, but not from that. The other thing, lights. That's another thing. The reality is the vast majority of people that hang a weapon mounted light on their pistol do so make it a muzzle weight, just like the old muzzle weights you used to put on the 22 match pistol to shoot 50-meter bullseye. Oh, they never turned the damn thing on. I have actually seen IDPA shooters recently with solid brass flashlights that are not functional flashlights that they put on your desk cover. And they're nothing in the world of muzzle weights. Until just a couple of years ago, I was able to say that in my entire career, I have never found a single private citizen defensive shooting involving a weapon-mounted light. But I finally found one, or a flashlight of any kind. I finally found one, but it occurred on a pig farm in the middle of no friggin' where a guy goes out of his door at night. He always has a flashlight in his hand because he can't find his fucking car without it. So he already had the flashlight in hand when the problem came up and was able to use it. The reason it never turns up otherwise is because the flashlight is a proactive instrument. You get it out to go look for something, whereas the pistol is a reactive instrument. You get it out because somebody else did something. Cops get a flashlight out to go in dark places and look for bad men. Private citizens should not be doing that. If Leon steps out from between the parked cars on the parking lot and points a pistol at you, you're not going to need to point a flashlight at him. Okay. And the whole idea of a weapon-mounted light, I'm going to point my gun at somebody and light them up to see if I need to point a gun at them. It's just patently stupid. When you point your gun at them, light them up, and find out you don't need to point a gun at them, you just committed aggravated assault or assault with a deadly weapon, depending on what state you're in. So that's just stupid. So the bottom line is, out of 70-something shootings our students have been involved in, not one of them involved a flashlight. And not one of them in the debrief indicated any need for a flashlight whatsoever. Hell, I've had you have too. Had my gun out at 3 in the morning on the 7-Eleven parking lot to see the sights better than you could at 3 in the afternoon on an overcast day because of all the artificial light. You know, the guy that lives on a pig farm is an anomaly. The 99.99% of our students don't live on pig farms. They live in urban areas where it's not dark. You know, some of this just goes to ignorance, and ignorance is not a malicious term. Ignorance means you don't have the requisite information. Ignorance of violent crime. People think it happens in some kind of vacuum. The bad guy's not standing there in the dark feeling, there's one. What they're doing is observing potential victims, which means it's got to be what?
You got to be able to see it. Yeah.
You will see it. If you could see that that's somebody you don't know with a gun in his hand, you don't need a flashlight. So I would much rather see the time and effort put into managing lights, put into something that's a lot more likely to come into play.
Now, it pains me to do this. John Hearn made a good point today.
And that makes 2 this decade.
Yeah, it hurts right here in my sternum. He pointed out, he says, we see these arguments over what distance to zero an optic at. He says, we never see that, what distance do you zero your irons at, because nobody zeroes their irons. Yes, I thought you might like that. Would be something up your alley.
Most people can't shoot irons well enough to tell if they're zeroed or not. Yeah. One of the things we do in instructor class is put up the V8s and watch back at 25 and just see. Part of the reason I want to do that is to see exactly, do you know where your gun's zeroed? Because a lot of people get back there and are shocked that things hitting a foot high 3 inches to the left. I didn't know that. Well, if you march back to 25 and shot something every now and then, you might know that. Mm-hmm. But yeah, he's got a point there. Yeah. For typical defensive use, I like the gun to hit right above the top of the front sight at 25 with irons, and so I suspect I'd want it to do about the same thing with dots. They give you pretty much point blank range out to about 75 yards. You might be 2 inches above or 2 inches below, anywhere from muzzle to 75 that way. It pretty well covers what I need to do with a handgun.
Yeah. Well, we have been going right at an hour and a half.
I'm out of bourbon, and that means you're out of time.
I saw the glass getting anything you want to address that I didn't bring up?
No, I think we covered everything. If we didn't cover it, they don't need to know it's
Any parting shot for the audience?
Get out there and train. While you're training for diversity and inclusion, there are people out there trying to kill your ass. So.
There you go. All right. Well, folks, well, first, Tom, thank you for coming on the show again tonight. And I have enjoyed it. I hope the audience does enjoy it as much as I have. And it's funny, after you were on the last one, Tiffany sent me a message. It was just like you and Tom just sitting around talking. It's like, yeah, that's what we do.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Usually about 3 times a week. Just this time people get to listen to it.
It'll be the first time that's happened.
Yeah.
We usually do it on camera.
And to the audience, we know that your most important asset is your time. Thank you for choosing to spend it with us.